the status quo, who want to make sure Obamacare stays funded, who want to avoid any risk, one of the approaches they do is they try to make this all about people. They try to make it all about personalities. And listen, most Americans could not care less about any politician in Washington. They don't care about me. They don't care about anybody else either. And what is utterly maddening about all of these reporters is, what do they write about all day long? They write about the process. They write about the horse race. They write about this personality or the other. They act like they're Hollywood gossip columnists, writing about bickering. I mean, how many times have you and I both read the word Republican Civil War in the past week? Because that's what they like to write about. Right. And listen, what I tried to spend much of the filibuster all but begging the media to do. In fact, I explicitly said, listen, all right, you guys can't resist writing some about the process, some about that silliness, but let me just ask you 50% of what you write. Discuss the substance of how Obamacare is the #1 job killer in the country, how millions of Americans are suffering, how it's forcing people into part-time work, how it's threatening millions of Americans' health insurance. Just write a little about the substance. And the strategy on the other side is really twofold. Number one, confuse the voters. Confuse the voters with procedural obfuscation, with complexity, so that they don't understand what's going on. And number two, make it all about personalities. And listen, others can engage in that game. Rush, I have no intention of defending myself or reciprocating. It's not about anybody. It's not about us. It is about listening to the American people and stopping this disaster, this nightmare, this train wreck that is Obamacare.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about is I know you just said you don't want to defend yourself, and I'm not asking you to do this, but I do want to put to you a criticism that I have heard, and it is, you have too, that you have, oh heaven forbid, you have ignored the inside rules of the Senate, that you didn't go to your party conference to try to convince them, etc., to do this, and that you love just being an outsider, and that the precious rules of the Senate were not observed, and because of that, you're harming the party.
Well, I will note that some of the folks making that argument, in fact, the only folks I've seen making that argument are not, in fact, senators, who attend the meetings. Indeed, I've heard it referred to as the Thursday meeting of the conference. The meeting's actually on Tuesday, so the people who go on television purporting to know what they're talking about, they don't actually know what day the Senate meets. And more fundamentally, I've attended not all, but virtually all of the meetings since I've been in the Senate, and we have been discussing, number one, strategies on Obamacare for at least 6 months. Mike and Lee and I have been going over and over and over again saying, does anyone else have an alternative? Does anyone else have any plan? And there's never been a plan, and we've been talking about this for months. So nobody has an argument, at least no one that's actually attended those lunches, that we didn't discuss this ad nauseum. Now, they have a different argument that we didn't wait for and get their approval and permission to stand up and do our best to fight this fight, because look, each of the 100 senators, we're elected by our constituents, and I've got an obligation not to my colleagues, but to 26 million Texans to fight for them.
Senator, most of your colleagues said exactly what you've said in the last 21 hours, in the last 2 weeks, in the last year. Most of your colleagues said years ago what you said. At the moment of truth, they're not to be found. They've sought solace somewhere else. But they don't seem to. I look at what you're doing, forgive me for characterizing, I look at what you're doing as simply doing what you were elected to do, as you said, but you're also drawing a line. At some point, we've got to say we're not going to allow this kind of freedom to be lost in this country. I think this is what this is about. What Obamacare substantively is what you're about.
Rush, I think you are absolutely right. And to be honest, look, I think what Mike and I are doing, I don't view as a terribly big deal. We're trying to actually stand for the principles that every Republican in the Senate says he or she believes in. We're trying to actually listen to the American people, and we're trying to tell the truth. I mean, part of why, you know, people ask, why does Congress have, 10, 12, 15% approval rating? It's because for years, Congress has ignored the will of the American people. And this process, I think it's important for your listeners to understand how this process is going to play out this next week, because much of what the Senate does is engage in show votes that are designed to look one way to the voters and, in fact, be like World Federation Wrestling, entirely fixed. So what's going to happen next? is on Friday or Saturday, we're going to have a vote on what's called cloture on the bill. That is the vote that matters. It takes 60 votes to grant cloture. What cloture is cutting off debate, saying there should be no more debate. And the reason that matters is if Harry Reid gets 60 votes to cut off debate to get cloture on the bill, he will then file one amendment, he said only one amendment, that guts the House continuing resolution and that fully funds Obamacare.